Your soulmate's parents hired a private investigator to learn more about you. What they found surprised them. My beloved child. Do not scroll past this moment. Something has been moving quietly behind the scenes, and you were never supposed to know about it this way. Yet here you are, listening now, at the exact moment when a hidden conversation, a private decision, and an unexpected discovery are beginning to come together. What you are about to hear is not a warning meant to frighten you. It is a revelation wrapped in emotion, because someone close to the person who carries you in their heart wanted answers about you. They wanted facts. They wanted certainty. They wanted to know who you really were when nobody was watching. And what they discovered did not match the story they had created in their minds. You see, beloved, your soulmate has spoken about you more than you realize. Not always with dramatic words. Not always with confessions that would reveal everything. Sometimes your name entered the room in the smallest ways. A pause before answering a question. A smile that appeared without permission. A sudden change in tone whenever someone mentioned love, commitment, trust, or the future. Their parents noticed these things. Parents often notice what their children try hardest to hide, and your soulmate could not completely hide the effect you had on them. There was something different in their eyes. Something softer, but also more serious. Something that made their family wonder whether this connection was temporary, or whether it was quietly becoming one of the most important relationships of their life. At first, curiosity was innocent. Questions were asked around the dinner table. Who is this person? How did you meet? What do you really know about them? Your soulmate tried to answer, but every answer created another question. Not because you had done something wrong, but because love makes families protective. The more your soulmate defended your character, the more their parents realized that this was no casual attachment. Their child was emotionally invested. Deeply invested. And that frightened them in a way they did not want to admit. One evening, after your soulmate had left the room, the conversation changed. The warmth disappeared. The questions became serious. One parent said something that made the other fall silent. They wondered if love had made their child too trusting. They wondered if there were parts of your life your soulmate did not know. They worried that emotion might be blinding them to something important. They had seen relationships in the past that looked beautiful in the beginning and became complicated later. They did not want that for their child. So they made a decision in private, believing they were protecting someone they loved. They decided to learn more about you. But listen carefully, because this is where the story becomes something none of them expected. They did not tell your soulmate what they were doing. Your soulmate continued speaking about you with affection, unaware that questions were being asked behind the scenes. Their parents contacted someone whose job was to look beyond appearances, beyond social impressions, beyond what people voluntarily reveal. They expected perhaps a simple background check, a handful of ordinary facts, enough information to calm their concerns. Yet beneath that decision was another motive they had not fully admitted to themselves. Part of them expected to find something that would justify their hesitation about you. And this is important, beloved, Sometimes people begin searching for flaws because accepting someone's goodness requires them to release their fear. Your soulmate's parents had built an image of you before truly knowing you. They imagined possibilities. Perhaps you were too complicated. Perhaps you were hiding your intentions. Perhaps you wanted something from their child. Perhaps your soulmate was seeing your best side while missing another side entirely. These fears did not come from truth. They came from uncertainty. But uncertainty can become powerful when people keep feeding it. So they wanted evidence. They wanted facts strong enough to either confirm their fears or destroy them. What happened next began slowly. The investigator gathered ordinary pieces first. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dangerous. Just traces of who you had been through your choices, routines, connections, responsibilities, and the way people remembered you. At first, your soulmate's parents listened with guarded expressions. They were waiting. Almost expecting the moment when something uncomfortable would surface. Instead, the first surprise was how little drama surrounded your name. There were no explosive secrets waiting to be uncovered. No shocking double life. No hidden story that explained why their child should stay away. What appeared instead was something far more difficult for suspicious people to dismiss: consistency. You had been more consistent than they expected. The way you treated people when there was nothing to gain from them began to matter. The moments when you helped quietly without turning kindness into a performance began to matter. The responsibilities you had carried without announcing them began to matter. The times you had endured disappointment and still refused to become cruel began to matter. Details that seemed small separately began forming a picture none of them had prepared themselves to see. And heaven whispers this to you now. Character is often revealed most clearly in moments you never thought anyone would remember. There were people who remembered your patience. Someone remembered a time you could have embarrassed another person but chose not to. Someone else remembered that you had remained loyal during a difficult situation when leaving would have been easier. Another person described you as someone who sometimes carries more than you admit. The investigator did not need dramatic language. The pattern was enough. Your soulmate's mother, or the one carrying that nurturing energy in the family, became unusually quiet while listening. Your soulmate's father, or the more protective authority within the family, asked for clarification. Are you sure? That question revealed everything. Because the answer they were hearing was not the answer they expected. They had expected uncertainty around you. Instead, they were hearing about restraint. They had expected selfish motives. Instead, they were hearing about loyalty. They had expected inconsistency. Instead, they were seeing that even through difficult seasons, something about your values had remained stable. But that was only the beginning. There was one detail the investigator found that changed the atmosphere completely. It concerned something from your past. Not a scandal. Not something shameful. Something you had survived quietly. There had been a season when you were carrying pressure that many people around you never fully understood. You may have smiled during that season. You may have gone to work, answered messages, completed responsibilities, supported others, and behaved as though everything was manageable. Yet beneath that calm exterior, you were learning how to stand without much support. You were discovering who would remain, who would disappear, and whether you could trust your own strength when life did not give you easy answers. Your soulmate knew pieces of this, but not everything. Their parents knew even less. And when the investigator described how you had handled that chapter, something in them shifted. They had assumed strength meant an easy past. But suddenly they were seeing that your strength had been built through things you rarely talk about. They began to understand why you were careful with trust. Why you might take time before opening completely. Why certain words mattered so much to you. Why loyalty was not simply romantic language in your world. It was something life had taught you to value because you knew what it felt like when loyalty was absent. The room grew quieter. For the first time, this was no longer an investigation into whether you were good enough for their child. It became a discovery of what you had already walked through before their child ever entered your story. And that realization touched something in them. One of the parents asked, almost reluctantly, "Does our child know this?" The investigator could not answer that. And that unanswered question followed them for the rest of the evening. Because suddenly they wondered whether they had judged you without understanding you. They wondered whether their protective instincts had crossed into unfair assumptions. They wondered whether their child had seen something in you that they had been too cautious to recognize. Meanwhile, your soulmate had no idea this conversation was happening. They were thinking about you for completely different reasons. There had been something they wanted to tell you. Something emotional. Something they had rehearsed in their minds several times but never found the right moment to say. Your soulmate had been noticing a distance between what they felt and what they actually expressed. They knew you could sense it. They knew there were moments when you questioned whether they truly understood your heart. And secretly, they were afraid that one day you might stop waiting for them to become brave enough to say what mattered. This is where two hidden stories began moving toward each other. In one place, your soulmate's parents were learning about your character. In another, your soulmate was wrestling with their feelings for you. And neither side knew what the other was discovering. Beloved, there is something sacred about truth arriving from multiple directions at once. One person may resist what another already knows. One heart may recognize your value long before another is ready. Yet truth has a way of gathering witnesses. Not because you need everyone's approval, but because sometimes the very people who doubted you must confront the gap between what they assumed and what is real. The investigation continued. The investigator spoke to someone who had known you during a difficult chapter. This person did not describe you as perfect. That was what made their words powerful. They mentioned your flaws. Your stubbornness at times. Your tendency to withdraw when hurt. The way you sometimes carry things alone rather than asking for help. But then they said something your soulmate's parents were not prepared to hear. They said that even when you were hurting, you did not deliberately destroy others just to feel powerful. That sentence stayed in the room. Because people are often revealed most clearly by how they behave when disappointed. Anyone can appear kind when life is giving them what they want. Anyone can seem generous when they feel secure. But pain reveals character differently. Rejection reveals character. Loss reveals character. Misunderstanding reveals character. And the story being uncovered about you was not that you had never made mistakes. It was that your pain had not turned you into someone without compassion. Your soulmate's parents exchanged a look. That look carried guilt. Not overwhelming guilt, but the uncomfortable realization that perhaps they had been searching for a reason not to trust you, while their child had been trying to explain why they did. Then came another discovery. This one involved your soulmate directly. The investigator found evidence that there had been moments when you could have spoken negatively about your soulmate to others, especially during times when you felt confused or disappointed. There were opportunities to expose private details. Opportunities to gain sympathy. Opportunities to make yourself look right by making them look wrong. But you did not. You protected certain parts of your connection, even while you were hurting. You chose silence in places where gossip would have been easier. When this was explained, one parent leaned back and said nothing for several seconds. Because that was the moment the investigation stopped feeling professional and started feeling personal. Their child had trusted you with vulnerable parts of themselves. And you had protected that vulnerability. Not perfectly. Not magically. But intentionally. Beloved, do you understand what that means? They had been investigating whether you were safe for their child while discovering that, in important moments, you had already been protecting the emotional safety of the very person they were worried about. The irony was impossible to ignore. And heaven says this softly, sometimes your greatest defense is the evidence of how you behaved when nobody expected you to explain yourself. You did not know an investigation would happen. You were not performing for their family. You were not preparing evidence. You were simply living. That is why the discoveries carried weight. Still, one parent resisted. They asked the investigator to keep going. Everyone has something, they said. There was skepticism in the sentence, but beneath it was something else, fear of being wrong. Because if they were wrong about you, they would have to reconsider the advice they had already given their child. There had been conversations you never heard. Your soulmate had been told to move slowly. To be careful. To protect themselves. Perhaps even to create distance until they were certain about you. Your soulmate had listened, but not completely. Something inside them resisted walking away. They could not fully explain why. They only knew that every time they tried to reduce what they felt for you into something temporary, their heart refused to cooperate. They remembered your voice. Your patience. A particular conversation. A look you gave them during a moment when they were uncertain. The way you seemed to understand what they were trying to say before they had finished saying it. These details had become anchors inside them. And while their parents were searching your history for reasons to be cautious, your soulmate was quietly collecting reasons to believe the connection was worth protecting. Then the investigator uncovered something that had nothing to do with romance. It concerned a person you had helped in the past. You may not even consider what you did significant anymore. Perhaps it was advice. Perhaps support during a difficult moment. Perhaps you gave your time when you were already exhausted. Perhaps you encouraged someone who had almost given up on themselves. Whatever the exact form, it had stayed with that person far longer than you knew. They remembered. And when asked about your character, that memory became part of their answer. Your soulmate's mother felt her eyes fill. Not because the story was dramatic, but because it revealed a side of you she had never considered. She had been asking, will this person take care of my child's heart? Now she was beginning to ask, has this person been carrying a caring heart all along? Those are very different questions. The first comes from suspicion. The second comes from recognition. And something was changing. But the strongest revelation had not happened yet. The investigator had one final conversation scheduled before completing the report. It was with someone whose name your soulmate's parents did not recognize. Someone connected to a chapter of your life you rarely discuss. When that conversation happened, even the investigator was surprised by what came forward. Because this person remembered you during a moment when you had every reason to walk away. You had been placed in a situation where loyalty cost you something. Staying kind cost you something. Keeping your word cost you something. And yet you did it anyway. Not because you were weak. Not because you lacked boundaries. But because when you give your word sincerely, you do not treat people as disposable the moment circumstances become inconvenient. That testimony changed the tone of the entire report. When your soulmate's parents heard it, the parent who had been most skeptical lowered their eyes. For the first time, there was no immediate question. No challenge. No request for more evidence. Just silence. Long silence. Then came the sentence no one expected. I think we may have misunderstood this person. The words were quiet. But they changed everything. Because your soulmate's parents were not simply learning facts about you anymore. They were confronting their own assumptions. They remembered the warnings they had given. The doubts they had planted. The way they had questioned whether their child was seeing you clearly. And suddenly a difficult possibility entered their minds. What if their child had been seeing you more clearly than they had? What if love had not blinded your soulmate? What if fear had blinded them? Beloved, this is the part that heaven wants you to understand. Not every person who doubts you is your enemy. Some people are simply protecting what they love with incomplete information. Yet when truth arrives, character is revealed not only in the person being judged, but also in the person doing the judging. Will they cling to pride, or will they allow new understanding to change them? That question was now facing your soulmate's parents. And soon, another question would become even bigger. Should they tell your soulmate what they had done? Because the investigation was secret. Your soulmate did not know. And if they discovered that their parents had looked into your life without telling them, there could be anger. There could be disappointment. There could be a difficult family conversation. Yet hiding it now seemed wrong. Especially because what they had found had changed how they viewed you. One parent wanted to confess immediately. The other wanted time. They argued quietly. One said, they deserve to know. The other replied, not until we understand what this means. But what they truly meant was, not until we understand what this person may mean to our child's future. And while they debated, your soulmate received a message. Not from the investigator. Not from their parents. From you. It was an ordinary message. Perhaps simple. Perhaps warm. Perhaps something you sent without overthinking. But your soulmate stared at it longer than usual. They had been emotionally unsettled all day, sensing that something was changing around them without knowing why. And when your message appeared, their heart softened. They smiled. One of their parents saw that smile. And for the first time, instead of feeling suspicious, they understood it. They understood why their child's face changed around your name. They understood why walking away from you had never seemed easy. They understood why their child had defended you even when the family pushed back. Because now they had seen enough pieces of your story to realize that the connection was not built only on attraction. Their child respected something in you. Something deeper. And respect is harder to dismiss than infatuation. That night, one parent went through the investigator's notes again alone. They reread details slowly. The quiet acts. The difficult seasons. The loyalty. The imperfections. The way you handled conflict. The way others described your heart. Then they reached a section they had skimmed earlier. A short note. Almost insignificant at first glance, but when they read it carefully, their expression changed. There was another connection. Another person. Someone from your soulmate's family had crossed paths with you before. Long before anyone realized who you were. Your soulmate's parent froze. They read the name twice. Then a third time. Because they knew that name. And suddenly the investigation was no longer simply revealing who you were. It was revealing that your story and their family's story may have touched much earlier than anyone knew. A memory came rushing back. A conversation from years ago. A favor someone had never forgotten. A person who once spoke about a stranger whose kindness arrived during a difficult moment. At the time, nobody knew that stranger was you. But now the details matched. The timeline matched. The place matched, and when your soulmate's parent realized what they were looking at, they covered their mouth in disbelief. Because you had already helped someone connected to this family before you ever knew your soulmate would become important to you. You had done it without knowing who they were, without knowing it could ever benefit you. Without knowing anyone would remember. And this changed everything. The next morning, your soulmate's parents called the investigator back. Their tone was different. No suspicion. No interrogation. Only urgency. They wanted confirmation. They wanted to know whether the connection was real. The investigator checked again. And the answer came back. Yes. It was you. Beloved, understand the weight of this. They began the investigation trying to discover whether there was something about you their child should fear. Instead, they uncovered a story that made them wonder whether you had entered their family's path long before the romance even began. Now they could no longer pretend you were simply a stranger who had appeared in their child's life. Your name already existed in a memory they had treasured. A memory of unexpected kindness. And they had almost judged the same person without realizing it. The parent who had doubted you most became emotional. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But deeply. Because pride was breaking. They remembered every skeptical question they had asked their child. Every cautious statement. Every time they suggested that perhaps you were not who you seemed. And now they were holding evidence that you had once shown kindness to their own family when there was absolutely nothing for you to gain. That was the moment their resistance began to collapse. But something else happened immediately after. Your soulmate walked into the room. Unexpectedly. Earlier than anyone thought they would. The investigator's report was still open. The parents exchanged a panicked look. Your soulmate noticed. What is that? Silence. The room changed instantly. Your soulmate looked from one parent to the other. What did you do? No one answered quickly enough. And in that hesitation, your soulmate understood that whatever was happening involved you. Their expression changed. They reached toward the papers. One parent tried to speak. Before you get upset, you need to understand why we did this. But your soulmate was already reading your name. Their face went still. The air became heavy. Then they looked up with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear. You investigated them? That question echoed through the room. And before either parent could explain, your soulmate turned another page. They saw the details. They saw the testimonies. They saw the chapter from your past. They saw the things you had never told them. And then they reached the final note. The connection to their family. The forgotten act of kindness. The proof that you had once touched their family's life without even knowing it. Their eyes filled instantly. They whispered your name. Not in anger. Not anymore. In astonishment. Then they read one final sentence written at the bottom of the report. A sentence the investigator had added after the last verification. And when your soulmate saw it, their entire expression changed. Because that sentence revealed something about you that even they had never known. Something that explained why one of their parents suddenly wanted to speak to you personally. Something that was about to turn this investigation into a confession. And beloved, the moment your soulmate looked up from that final page, they asked their parents one question that left the entire room silent. Why didn't anyone tell me what they did for our family? The room remained completely still after your soulmate asked that question. Why didn't anyone tell me what they did for our family? Their voice was softer now, but somehow that softness carried more emotion than anger ever could. Their fingers trembled around the investigator's report as they looked from one parent to the other, waiting for an explanation. And beloved, this was the moment everything hidden began to move toward the light. Not all at once. Not easily. But piece by piece, because the truth sitting on those pages had become too powerful to put back into secrecy. Your soulmate's mother lowered her eyes first. She had imagined this conversation happening differently. She had imagined explaining the investigation carefully, presenting it as an act of protection, perhaps even defending the decision. But now, Seeing the emotion on her child's face, those prepared explanations suddenly sounded weak. The investigation had begun because they questioned you. Yet it had ended with them questioning themselves. "We didn't know," she finally whispered. "We truly didn't know it was them." Your soulmate looked down at your name again, then at the old details written beside it. Their heart was beating faster because a memory from years earlier was beginning to return, a family story they had heard more than once but had never connected to you. There had been a difficult period in their family's past, a season rarely discussed in detail anymore. Someone close to them had been overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted, and trying to handle more than they were telling anyone. During that time, a person they barely knew had offered help without asking for recognition. It had not been some enormous public gesture. That was exactly why it mattered. It had been private, ordinary, almost invisible. A few compassionate words. An act of patience. A moment of assistance when it would have been easier to walk away. The family remembered the kindness, but they had never remembered enough details to identify the person responsible. Until now. Until your name appeared in the report. Your soulmate stared at the page, and suddenly pieces of conversations from the past began returning to them. They remembered hearing one of their parents say, years ago, "There are still good people in this world." They remembered someone in the family mentioning a stranger who had made a difficult day slightly easier. They remembered the gratitude in that story. But they had never imagined that the person being described would someday become the same person whose messages could make their heart race, whose silence could make them wonder, whose presence had somehow begun to feel like home. And this is where the story changed for your soulmate too. Because until this moment, they had loved you through what they personally knew about you. They loved your conversations. Your energy. The way you listened. The things you noticed. The strange comfort they felt around you. They loved the pieces of yourself you had allowed them to see. But now they were discovering a version of you that existed before you had anything to gain from loving them. And that mattered deeply. Your soulmate slowly turned toward their father. "You were the one who kept telling me to be careful." There was no accusation in the words this time. Only disappointment. Their father nodded. "Yes. You thought they wanted something from me." Another pause. "Yes. And they helped someone in our family before they even knew me?" The answer came quietly. "Yes." That single word broke something open. Your soulmate sat down. They covered their face for a moment, overwhelmed by the collision of anger, tenderness, surprise, and something almost impossible to name. Their parents expected them to continue arguing. Instead, your soulmate began crying quietly. Not because they were hurt by you. Because suddenly they understood something about you that they had been struggling to understand for a long time. You had never tried very hard to convince them that you were a good person. You had never arrived carrying a list of reasons they should trust you. You had never constantly advertised your kindness. In fact, there were times when your silence frustrated them. Times when they wished you would explain yourself more. Times when they wondered why you did not defend your heart when people misunderstood you. Now they understood, somewhere along the way, life had taught you that genuine character did not need to shout. And beloved, heaven whispers something into this fictional story now. What is real does not become real because everyone applauds it. A good heart does not become good only when somebody finally notices. The kindness you gave when nobody was measuring it mattered before anyone wrote it into a report. The loyalty you showed when nobody promised to reward you mattered before anyone praised it. Your character existed before this family discovered it, and it would have existed even if they never had. Your soulmate wiped their eyes and asked the question their parents had feared. Why did you investigate them in the first place? This time there could be no hiding. Their mother sat beside them. Because we were scared. Of what? Of how much you loved them. Your soulmate looked up. The answer surprised them. They had expected criticism of you. Instead, their parents were admitting something about themselves. Their mother continued. You changed when you started talking about them. You became serious. You started thinking about the future differently. We could see that this wasn't casual for you. And we were afraid that if you were wrong about them, you would be hurt in a way we couldn't fix. Your soulmate remained silent. Then their father spoke. And I thought emotion was making you ignore things. What things? I didn't know. That was the problem. The honesty of that sentence changed the atmosphere. He had not possessed evidence against you. He had possessed fear. And fear had filled in the blank spaces. Beloved, how often does this happen in life? Someone does not know your entire story, so their imagination writes the missing chapters. They do not understand your silence, so they assign motives to it. They do not know why you move carefully, so they call you distant. They do not know what you survived, so they assume your boundaries are arrogance. Yet when truth finally arrives, those assumptions begin collapsing one by one. Your soulmate looked again at the report. There were details about your past that even they had never heard. That created another emotion. Why had you never told them? One section described a moment when you had gone through something difficult almost entirely alone. Your soulmate read it twice. Their chest tightened. They remembered conversations where you had almost opened up about that period, then changed the subject. They remembered hearing something different in your voice and choosing not to push. At the time, they thought perhaps you simply did not trust them enough. Now they realized the truth was more complicated. You had become accustomed to carrying certain things privately. Your soulmate whispered, "They never told me this." Their mother looked at them carefully. Maybe they were waiting until they felt safe enough. Those words hit deeply. Because suddenly your soulmate had to ask themselves whether they had always made you feel safe. And the answer was uncomfortable. There had been moments when their uncertainty had reached you. Moments when they pulled back because family opinions frightened them. Moments when you needed reassurance and received confusion instead. Moments when you were trying to understand where you stood while your soulmate was quietly trying to decide whether loving you was worth the risk. They remembered one particular conversation. You had asked something simple. "Do you trust me?" Your soulmate had hesitated. Only for a second. But you noticed. You always noticed. They had answered yes afterward, but the hesitation had already spoken. Now, sitting beside an investigator's report filled with evidence of your character, that tiny hesitation returned like an echo. Their eyes filled again. Because perhaps while everyone was wondering whether you were trustworthy, nobody had asked whether they were giving you enough reasons to trust them. That realization hurt, and yet the story was not finished. There was still the investigator's final sentence. The one that had changed your soulmate's expression. They looked down and read it again. The investigator had written that during the course of gathering information, several unrelated people had described one unusual pattern about you. When you genuinely cared about someone, you tended to protect their dignity even after disagreements. You might distance yourself. You might become quiet. You might eventually walk away if necessary. But you rarely tried to destroy someone simply because they disappointed you. That pattern had appeared more than once. Different people. Different years. Different situations. The same underlying behavior. Your soulmate's father had been especially affected by this because his greatest fear was not that you would disagree with his child. Every relationship has disagreements. His fear was that if things became difficult, you might intentionally use your soulmate's vulnerabilities against them. The report suggested something different. And this was why he wanted to speak with you. Not to interrogate you. Not anymore. He wanted to apologize. But there was another reason. A much more emotional reason. He had recognized something about you that reminded him of himself when he was younger. He understood the instinct to carry everything alone. He understood being misunderstood because you did not explain yourself. He understood why a person might appear strong while privately wondering whether anyone would ever stay long enough to see what existed underneath that strength. And suddenly his protective instinct was changing direction. At first, he had wanted to protect his child from you. Now, strangely, part of him wanted to make sure his child did not carelessly hurt you. Your soulmate noticed the change in his expression. What are you thinking? He took a long breath. I think I owe them a conversation. Your soulmate immediately shook their head. No. The parents looked surprised. No? If anyone talks to them first, it's me. There was something decisive in your soulmate's voice now. Because a new fear had entered their heart. What if you discovered the investigation from someone else? What if you felt betrayed? What if you interpreted it as proof that their family would never accept you? Worse, what if you discovered that your soulmate had once listened to those doubts? Suddenly, the possibility of losing you felt real. Not because another person was taking you away. Not because love had disappeared. But because trust, once damaged, could become difficult to rebuild. Your soulmate stood. I need to tell them. Their mother reached for their hand. Wait. Why? Because there's something else. Those words stopped everyone. Your soulmate turned around slowly. Their mother looked toward the investigator's report, but she was not referring to anything written there. She was referring to a conversation that had happened the previous night. After the investigator confirmed your connection to the family's old memory, she had contacted the relative who had originally received your kindness. She had wanted verification directly from them. And what that person told her had never been added to the report. Your soulmate sat back down. What did they say? The mother hesitated. Because this detail carried an emotional weight nobody had expected. The relative remembered you clearly. Not just the act itself. They remembered something you said. At that time, the relative had tried to thank you. They had apparently asked why you were helping when you barely knew them. Your answer had been simple. You had said something close to, maybe someday someone will be there for somebody I love when I can't be. You had forgotten those words. But the person hearing them never did. Your soulmate's mother had cried when she heard this. And now your soulmate was crying too. Because years later, without planning it, without knowing it, without arranging any of it, you had become emotionally connected to the very family touched by that moment. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. There are coincidences that feel ordinary. And then there are coincidences that make people sit in silence. In this fictional spiritual story, this was one of those moments. Your soulmate whispered, "They really said that?" Their mother nodded. Apparently. Your soulmate looked toward the window. Their thoughts immediately went to you. Where were you right now? What were you doing? Did you have any idea that an entire family was sitting in a room discussing your heart? Of course you did not. You were living an ordinary moment while something extraordinary was unfolding elsewhere. Perhaps you were checking your phone. Perhaps you were wondering why your soulmate had seemed emotionally distant lately. Perhaps part of you had even begun wondering whether you should stop investing so much energy into someone who seemed uncertain. And that is what your soulmate suddenly feared most. They knew you cared. But they also knew you had limits. You were capable of loving deeply, yet life had taught you not to remain forever where your heart was constantly questioned. Your soulmate knew this. They had seen it in you. You could be patient for a long time. But when something inside you finally accepted that you were not valued, you could become very quiet. And your quietness frightened them more than anger. Because anger still reaches towards someone. Silence sometimes means the heart is preparing to release. Your soulmate picked up their phone. They opened your conversation. Their fingers hovered over the screen. They began typing. "I need to tell you something." Then they deleted it. Too frightening. They typed again. "Can we talk?" Deleted. Too vague. Again. "There's something my family did, and I don't want you hearing it from anyone else." They stared at the sentence. Their heart pounded. Their father watched from across the room. "Tell them the truth." Your soulmate looked up. It was almost unbelievable hearing those words from the same person who had insisted on investigating you. "Everything? Everything." Your soulmate looked back at the phone. But before they could press send, something happened. A message from you appeared first. The timing froze them. Your soulmate opened it. Whatever you had written was not angry. That somehow made it harder. Your message was warm, but there was something underneath it. A softness mixed with distance. The kind of message a person sends when they still care but are beginning to protect themselves. Your soulmate recognized it immediately. Their stomach dropped. Their mother saw their face. What happened? Your soulmate did not answer. They read your message again. And again. Then whispered, "I think they're pulling away." That sentence changed the urgency completely. Until now, this family had been discussing truth as though they had time. Suddenly, time felt precious. Your soulmate called you. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. No answer. They looked at the screen. Called again. Still nothing. Their father stood. Maybe they're busy. Your soulmate shook their head. You don't understand. What? I've seen them do this before. Do what? Become quiet when they're hurt. And now your soulmate remembered something else. Several days earlier, you had asked a question about their family. You wanted to know whether their parents accepted you. Your soulmate had avoided giving a direct answer. Not because they wanted to lie. Because they hoped the situation would improve before they had to tell you how uncertain their parents were. But you had sensed the hesitation. Of course you had. And perhaps your heart had already begun interpreting the silence. Your soulmate suddenly understood that while their parents were investigating you, you may have been quietly wondering whether you were welcome in their world at all. That realization brought guilt. They called again. No answer. Then your soulmate did something unexpected. They turned toward their parents and said, "If they walk away because of this, I'm not blaming them." The mother's eyes widened. Don't say that. It's true. They care about you. I know. That's why this matters. Your soulmate's voice broke. They trusted me with parts of themselves they don't give easily. And while they were doing that, we were sitting here questioning whether they deserved to be trusted. No one could argue. Then your soulmate's father reached for his own phone. "What are you doing?" your soulmate asked. "I'm calling someone." Who? The relative you had helped years ago. Your soulmate watched as the call connected. The relative answered. A short conversation followed. Then the father asked a question nobody expected. If they were standing in front of you today, what would you tell them? There was silence on the other end. Then the relative answered. The father listened carefully. His expression changed. He placed the phone on speaker. And the voice coming through said something your soulmate would remember for a very long time. I would tell them that they probably have no idea how much that small kindness mattered. I would tell them our family remembered it long after they forgot it. And I would tell them that if they are the person your child loves, maybe you should stop looking for reasons to fear them and start asking why life brought them back into your family in a completely different way. Your soulmate closed their eyes. That was it. The last wall fell. Their father sat down slowly. Their mother wiped her tears. And your soulmate looked at your unanswered conversation on the phone. Now there was no doubt. They were going to tell you everything. Not a polished version. Not a softened version. Everything. The suspicion. The investigator. The discoveries. The old family connection. The doubts they themselves had carried. The guilt. The change in their parents. All of it. Because if this connection was going to survive, truth had to become stronger than fear. Your soulmate typed a new message. This time they did not delete it. I need to tell you something my family did behind your back. You deserve the truth, even if you become angry with me after hearing it. But there's also something they discovered about you that connects you to my family from years before we met. I didn't know any of this. Please, when you can, talk to me. Their finger hovered over send. Then pressed. The message went through. Delivered. Your soulmate stared at the screen. No reply. Minutes passed. Their parents remained nearby, almost as nervous as they were. Then the screen changed. You had seen the message. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. The typing indicator appeared. Then disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. Your soulmate whispered, "They don't know what to say." Finally, your reply arrived. It contained only a few words. Your soulmate read them. Their face went pale. Their mother asked, "What did they say?" But your soulmate could not answer immediately. Because your message revealed something nobody in that room knew. You already knew someone had been asking questions about you. Not everything. Not who. But enough. Someone connected to the investigator had unknowingly left a trace, and days earlier you had realized that somebody was looking into your past. You had chosen not to confront your soulmate. You had waited. You wanted to see whether they would tell you themselves. And now your soulmate understood why you had been becoming quieter. You had not been pulling away because your love had disappeared. You had been waiting to discover whether honesty would arrive without you having to demand it. Your soulmate's hands trembled. Their father asked again, "What did they say?" Slowly, your soulmate turned the phone around. Your message was visible on the screen. It read, "I was wondering when you were going to tell me. But there's something about that old family story you still don't know." The room fell silent again. Your soulmate stared at the final sentence. Their mother leaned closer. Their father's expression changed. Because everyone had assumed the investigator had uncovered the entire story. Apparently, they had not. You knew another part. A part never written in the report. A part even the relative had never heard. And before your soulmate could respond, another message from you appeared. This one was longer. Your soulmate opened it. Read the first sentence. And immediately covered their mouth. Because what you were finally about to reveal was not about the kindness their family remembered. It was about what happened immediately afterward. And why, all those years ago, you had walked away from that moment carrying a promise you had never told anyone about.